Thanks for taking the time to listen in on our panel discussion here. We thought we'd start with a very broad theme, changing times, changing networks, which is our conference theme. And, you know, our industry over the years sometimes goes prolonged for several years, 5 years. We only have incremental change. The players stay pretty much the same. The funding programs might be, you know, steady and consistent, and technology, just incremental improvements. But over the last, say, 3-4 years, starting, you know, maybe a year before the pandemic came around, you know, there was a definite change in the landscape, and that being that there was quite a bit of consolidation in the industry. So there's fewer players now than there used to be in the BC landscape. And also, you know, fixed wireless and fiber are still the main methods for delivery of services to rural subscribers, with a little bit of coaxial as well in small cities. So those technologies have been around, of course, for a long time, but there's a distinct shift towards desire from the general public to move to a fiber-based deployment now that fiber has spread throughout most of the cities of British Columbia and people are familiar with that and all the marketing that's gone with it. You know, then we see the smaller communities and rural folks are thinking that fiber might be the answer for them too. And I would say, fortunately, the government has recognized that, you know, this is a scalable approach that will expand into the future with their investment as demands rise. So there's been a shift in funding programs to recognize the much higher cost of serving rural homes with fiber. So I've got a very august panel here to help me today. And I'd like to introduce them, and then we'll ask a few questions, and we'll roll along, and maybe the audience might have a few questions when we're finished. So let me start here with Dan Mundall from Lyttonnet. Dan's been in the internet business as long as I can remember, which is maybe as long as me. And Lyttonnet was one of those ISPs that felt passionate that there'd be a way to deploy fiber in his small hometown of Lytton, and has successfully done that, and today has hundreds of fiber clients that are getting, you know, the same service that you'd find in a larger center. So that's one of Dan's accomplishment with his group. And next to Dan, we've got Dave Ford, who's the Director of Business Development for Broadband Brothers, who are a Western Canadian-based fiber construction company with extensive experience in BC and Alberta, both contracting for the majors as well as taking small ISPs and Indigenous communities through the whole process of deploying fiber in their own community. So I'm sure Dave will have some interesting things to add. To the left of Dave, we've got Tim Ryan. Perhaps he doesn't need an introduction. Everybody knows Tim and his passion for fiber being the way of the future, going back 8 or 9 years ago when he decided that you know, fixed wireless was a limited technology that wouldn't keep up. I think Tim was always a student of the Nordic solutions, which, you know, first were talked about a long time ago, actually, in British Columbia, about how rural communities in Scandinavia had deployed rural fiber, usually trenched fiber with community-driven efforts, and were driving fiber service to rural homes ahead of many other jurisdictions on the planet. So Tim took note of that, and I think he learned a lot. He might be able to talk a little bit about how that influenced him. On our far left is Jonathan Black, the Executive Director of CanWISP, which is Canada's premier WISP collection, and his organization of WISPs has modified with the times over the last few years as well, with most of the WISPs realizing that they need to supplement their fixed wireless networks with fiber deployments. and most of them now offer a hybrid mix of fiber where they can make it work financially with or without grants, as well as a fixed wireless, which of course still provides good service to many rural Canadians. So but his members are in the midst of this evolution as well. So anyway, let me start off with Dan here. And Dan, can you give us a little bit of a background on how Lyttonnet got started with fiber?
Well, we got started with wireless in 2006 as part of some of the government initiatives to help get broadband into some of these rural communities. And after watching our usage grow year over year, almost doubling every year, and I might even add that it oftentimes was on a per user basis in excess of what you were seeing in an urban center, and kind of underlying the importance that broadband plays in a rural community. And we saw how this growth was not sustainable with the current technology and even the emerging stuff. Wireless just couldn't keep up with the demand we were seeing for bandwidth. And not only did that mean unhappy customers, it meant lost opportunities for people to be able to utilize a rural lifestyle. And so we started looking around at a community that we could pilot project fiber in, and we selected a small First Nation community near us, and it was a 100% volunteer-driven effort where we just basically researched the heck out of it and figured out the technology, what we could do with fiber, and got out there and learned some lessons. And it also worked as a showcase to take for going after some funding to service larger areas, because we had experience doing it at that point then. We had several years of operating a network then at that point, and it allowed us then to leverage that to fiber a good portion of the remaining customers we had.
Thanks very much, Dan. And of course, everyone knows the unfortunate fire that occurred in Lytton last year. How were you able to respond to that? You must have lost a bit of your plant and whatnot in that fire.
Yeah, we definitely were affected by that fire. We lost several of our fiber uplinks, our office, other key infrastructure, a good portion of our actual GPON network in town. Kind of split our network in half, and a real mess. But I will say that this is, again, one of those places where a small local entity can really shine, is agility and flexibility to adapt to the changing environment you're working in. And we were able in most places either to have our service uninterrupted during the fire because of our routed network, either that or to have infrastructure that was destroyed, rebuilt within a couple days in most cases. And even our fiber that was orphaned, we were able to get an OLT in there and service those customers across the burnt town. And yeah, so I would say, we're coming out of this stronger. We've learned lessons from this. I'd say this is a good example of why underground, wherever possible, is the best way to go. You don't have the chance of being burned out, and it can all burn up very, very quickly, as we saw.
Thanks very much, Dan. Let me switch over to Jonathan Black. Jonathan, with fiber being the trend today, but wireless still capable of the 50 and 10 standard. So what examples are your members engaged in here where they've successfully moved their networks from wireless to hybrid networks?
Yeah, so if I back up a little bit, about 4 or 5 years ago at our conference, we started having panels of ISPs talking about their experience, and fiber was one that's been a recurring theme there. So I know MCSnet was up on the stage at that time, and a number of other ISPs, and we really started to see the shift even back then. I know, Tim, you would have started that shift before then, but given that our audience was predominantly ISPs that have deployed fixed wireless, they were doing it already 5 years ago or so, and we started to see that shift. We've had a number of fiber technology vendors at our shows for a couple of years. We did a survey earlier this year, about 150 ISPs that we have contact with. I will admit there's a bias in our list of ISPs. Most of them would have fixed wireless in their portfolio of access solutions, but it wouldn't always be the largest part of their access solution, but they would all have some fixed wireless. So we surveyed them and we said, how many of you own your own fiber networks? And half of them already owned their own fiber network as part of a fiber to the premise solution and access solution. We asked them, what projects are you undertaking in the next year, either greenfield or expansion? And 70+% of them were saying, actually 80% of them were saying, we are doing a fiber project in the next year. Most of them were also doing fixed wireless, but 80% of them were doing fiber. So a lot of those are going to be greenfield for them, and that's good news. Yeah, that's right. The other sort of interesting thing, we asked, what services do you offer beyond core access, beyond sort of the basic getting on the internet service? 80% of them offered 70% plus offered whole home internet, sort of moving the demarcation point further into the house, if you think of that old dial tone analogy. And most of them, 60% plus, offered VoIP. So there still is a need for a so-called landline out there. The whole home internet was the most popular other solution. The other thing, again, our survey did have some bias. It did go right across the country, but 80% of them said that 90% of their network was in rural areas. Now, we didn't give them a definition of rural, and I realize we could debate that quite extensively here, but the networks that they own are not in urban centers. So what we've started to do, Bob, is we've started to talk about rural ISPs rather than fixed wireless ISPs. And they have been and continue to deploy hybrid networks where they're doing fiber access and fixed wireless where fiber doesn't make sense or where the infrastructure just isn't in place for them to get further out. So again, the smaller communities are being fibered, and outside that community is getting fixed wireless. That's pretty significant proportion of our membership.
Jonathan, of course, it's always desirable to get some capital construction costs for these type of networks, but of course, particularly in Ontario, I've heard many challenging stories about accessing those funds for the WISPs. Have a lot of them just proceeded to self-finance their fiber builds, or are they hanging in there hoping for some support?
Are you asking me to tell you how great it is in BC? Is that what you want me to say? Yeah. Based on the discussions I've had around the room and with Bob, the funding programs that are provincially done in Ontario have been very hard for the small ISPs to access. And when I say small ISP, I'd say that is anyone under $100 million in revenue. The funding that is available is difficult for you to obtain if you're a small ISP. The construction bonding that's required, the guarantees that are needed to be put in place have significantly given them turned them into a second-rate ISP in their submissions to the government funding program. So what have they done? They have self-funded. Some of them have found some private investor, either local private investor backing, or some private equity funds are out there and are assisting. I know that's been done in Manitoba a fair bit as well. We continue to raise the issue that the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, although one of its 5 core mandates is broadband internet, its deal size excludes pretty much everyone in this room, TELUS accepted probably, where why should the government give a $50 million loan to an organization that is sub 100 million in revenue? It shouldn't happen. So the Canadian Infrastructure Bank is basically a funding pool for the carriers to get access to free or very cheap below market debt. BDC has been helped. I don't know if I mentioned that. They will do some things. The rates are not great. It's expensive money, but you can get it. And they also tend to be very flexible on the terms of repayment and how you can go about making those arrangements with them. So those are some of the things they've done to find private financing.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, I do know from my own personal experience that we started off in 1998 doing fixed wireless out of pretty basic components that did not cost very much money, supplying a customer base that was beating down the door for you to come and serve them. And it was a kind of a different era than where we find ourselves today. And people could have 1-year paybacks on their investments and that kind of stuff. Then we later on got carried away with commercial grade gear, and we were able to put up with 3-year paybacks on it. But of course, that mindset never really lent itself to fiber paybacks, which typically were a much longer cycle. Can you comment on that?
Well, the banks understand they understand fiber better than they understand fixed wireless, and they are willing to let you amortize that over a much longer period. So a fiber installation is easier for a bank to understand and contemplate. Storm Internet, where I was for a number of years, when they started out, they actually designed their own printed circuit boards, had them shipped over. They were building their own radios. Yeah, ooh.
Well, brave, and that's innovative.
That's something, the fiber is a little easier to finance through the banks. They do seem to understand that.
Thank you. Tim, you said you started off wondering how these Nordic people could do it, and we couldn't. And that led to your famous project in Caslow, BC. You want to take us back to far enough in time to when this was just a germ of an idea?
Actually, before I moved to Caslow, I come from a totally different industry. I'm not a telco guy. What I was a photographer who grew into a lab operator, who grew into a digital photography manufacturing business. And I sold the first full-on professional digital cameras, the ones that turned photography from an analog game in the late 90s to a completely digital game in the early 2000s. So to put that in context, a 6 megapixel digital camera in 1999 was 42 grand Canadian. And who was buying them? Well, the guy who was buying $50,000 a year worth of film off of me. Okay? The problem was, he then had to take that device, extract the imagery out of it, and upload it over his internet connection to my secure FTP server. While my secure FTP server lived on a set of 100 megabit fiber optic ports. The upload bandwidth, well, all I can say is, at that time, 5-in-1 was the UBF standard. Okay. But the only problem was, we actually might have gotten away with it if 5-in-1 truly existed, instead of being an advertising fiction. Now, on the strength of actually a 6-in-1, I moved to a little town called Caslow. And I figured, how bad could it be? They're offering 6-in-1, and I can see the circuit office out my window. How bad could it be? Well, actually, it was terrible. It was 1 down and 0.2 up. And I really understood then why I had so many customers who were moaning and bitching about their internet connection. And that's when I started to rethink this on a whole bunch of areas. Number one, I was bound and determined to get a fiber drop in my house that was equivalent to what I was buying commercially. And I have it today, 400 down and 400 up for $150 a month and no usage charge. That's what I call internet. The rest of it, well, not so much. Or a whole lot less down or less up than it is down. And the problem with those is those networks are usable for consumption, but they're not usable for productivity. And that really came home to roost on us over the last couple of years of pandemics, that if you wanted to work from home and you're running over a VPN connection or you need to move files, that upload bandwidth is the difference between winning and losing. I believe that we are going to fundamentally have to rethink networking from the so much down and so much up model to go to what I call pervasive, symmetric, full duplex networking, and nothing less than 100 up and 100 down is worth discussion because it's useless for production purposes. Yeah, you can stream off of 5010, but try maintaining a link with a couple of users banging on it where you've got to move files in any kind of sensible time. And remember that in 2001, a 6 megapixel digital camera was 42 grand. Today, every last one of you have one in your pocket, and it's more like 20 or 25 megabits. And when you upload from this, all I can say is, I hope you got fiber. I believe that all communities deserve nothing less than symmetric connectivity at the residence. But we've also not even begun to discuss the reality of how do you run your community without pervasive connectivity. And that's the biggest piece of the message that I'm trying to get across now, because I think we're actually at the stage where we need to rethink a lot of the stuff that we've done in the short term over the last decade. Okay, and really in Canada, it's been the last decade. In Sweden, and I don't hesitate to take good ideas from people from elsewhere, Sweden's been doing it for 20 years. And in virtually the same conditions as rural areas in Canada. You know, sea on one side, Rocky Mountain on another, bit of a highway in between and a lot of distance and a low density population. Sounds a whole lot like the interior of BC to me. And when I looked at their mapping, it didn't look an awful lot different from the mapping that we dealt with where I live in the North Arm of Kootenay Lake. Now, to put that in context, in 10 years, every taxable property ID in the village of Caslow, in Area D of the Regional District of Central Kootenay, will be served, about 80% of them are already, will be served with a dedicated switched Ethernet fiber drop, which will carry a gigabit up and a gigabit down. And that's what I call a network. And with no change in the fiber whatsoever, just the endpoint electronics, that becomes 10 gigs up and down. And I want to announce to all of you that I have an agreement with the Swedes to bring their switchgear to our marketplace and be able to deliver what we've delivered in Caslow at about the same costs that it cost us to do it in Caslow. To put that in context, the average small village, case in point Caslow, the cost to deliver from scratch, including fiber, trenching, endpoint electronics, switchgear, the whole enchilada, has been about somewhere between $700 and $1,000 per household. The worst case scenario we've dealt with are the ones like on the north end of the lake in communities like Argenta and Johnson's Landing, where it's a couple of kilometers between households and on dirt roads. But every community in rural areas has a few guys with a trenching machine, or, you know, and you can find, if you partner up with the community and build a network that's good for the community's dwellings, it's good for the community property, and it's good for the people who have to manage the services in the community themselves. And I want to point, for example, to Daniel's gear, where the tools that he's been selling to the oil patch for a long time are also the kind of tools that make it possible to manage septic systems, sewer systems, water supplies, pump monitors, all the stuff that you have to control that are the physical assets of a community. And if you sit down with the community that you live in, they'll be only too happy to pass you a permit to build for yourself and for them together as a group. In our case, there was a WISP in Caslow that started out as a proxy modem in 1996 to beat toll charges on dial-up. Okay? They became a WISP to be able to deliver beyond the reach of the DSL services that barely made it to the village limit. I know those were the DSL services that I tried to survive on in 2003 and failed. So the flip side of all of that was the WISP that converted to a fiber, and they still to this day serve a couple of hundred wireless subscribers along with pretty close to 900 fiber to the premises subscribers. The difference, they pay about the same money, but the fiber guys get 100 down and 100 up for the same money as the wireless endpoints get 5 down and 1 up. And that's the blunt reality. It's as far as you can take wireless. It's not that wireless operators are bad people. They're just hamstrung by the technology.
There's a lot better solutions out there than 5.1.
Over 30 kilometers, no. And the reality is the ones that have been toughest to finish off are the ones with the longest distances. But we're here for the long term. Here's the big benefit. When you put fiber in the ground and you trench it to your customer's premises, your line of sight maintenance goes away. You never have to run around with pruning shears again, clipping fiber or taking phone calls about poor connection because somebody overgrew their access antenna. And the level of maintenance and what you deliver in terms of services is light years and light pipes better than doing wireless. And you got a long-term asset that you're going to get at very, very least a 30 to 40 year payback for that investment. Most people don't realize it, but the fiber that we laid in the 90s, all of it is still in service today. And you can reasonably expect, short of savage attack with a backhoe, your investment will be paying you in retirement.
Well, thank you very much, Tim. That's very encouraging. Let's move on to Dave Ford. Dave works with the Broadband brothers, who have done work for a whole range of size companies, from TELUS to Shaw to small Indigenous groups. Dave, one of the things that has come out in our community is the idea that terrestrial deployments are better for smaller entities to play in, because they're easier to maintain without expensive line trucks and line guys, and they're impervious to fire and that type of damage. And of course, there's the advantage of not trying to take on the support structure industry in Canada, which is a complex set of affairs currently under a CRTC review. But it's unlikely, if you ask me, that the review could fix the problem, because it's really about, on one hand, bureaucracy, on the other hand, aging poles. It's only reasonable for the hydro companies to seek assistance in changing their pole plants out. We've had changes in how the poles are to be constructed, making a lot of poles that are actually still healthy and non-compliant and needed to be removed. And of course, you are going up against your competitor, the incumbent telephone company, as you approach those support structures. So terrestrial, as they worked for Tim and worked for Daniel, and what can you tell us a little bit about that type of technology or installations you've seen in Western Canada?
Thanks, Bob. Terrestrial deployment has come a long way in the last 4 or 5 years. We're seeing more demand for it. I want to speak to a couple of projects that Brothers Broadband, 3 or 4 years ago, we were a small company. Since then, we did a project for Soto First Nations up in northern BC. First Nations community with around Moberly Lake. A small project that kind of helped our vision and values grow. We deployed approximately 1,300 homes, fiber to the home. We worked with the community and the Indigenous people to deploy fiber with early stages of fiber deployment for Indigenous communities. Where we connected is we helped build the infrastructure, but we also took on the same model as the ISPs, is help them grow their own infrastructure. We trained the locals to build a network with us, to teach them how to repair, maintenance, and service as a growth strategy for their deployment for future growth trends, which is strategic for them to grow their networks. Since then, we've looked at other smaller opportunities. We're working with 468 First Nations in Fort McMurray. We have the Ochese First Nations project in Alberta. And deployment of these projects can be done economically. We're turnkey, so we can design, implement, buy the materials, keep costs low for the providers, work with other partners such as Shared Towers here with us. We're going to build commercial cell networks with them and help the Indigenous group, help the small rural communities build the adequate infrastructure that they need. It's totally doable. We help them build the infrastructure. The design build is it takes time to get permitting. That's the biggest challenge. But once you overcome that, we can all be fully transparent and get these products to the customer. That's the end goal, is everybody needs internet and everybody needs broadband. And we do it as a community and as a family and help people get that step to the right step.
Thanks. That's very encouraging, Dave. Something that's I'm curious about, is the time cycle. As you know, there's a new round of funding banging on the door here in British Columbia, but I know some of my customers have taken an interest in whether or not they would be able to preserve their market share through small fiber deployments, and they have lots of little pockets that are, well, they're not on the great size. They might only be 30 homes, 25 homes, so a little on the small side, but they are already the incumbent in those areas. But they're taking a look at submitting a proposal on the upcoming call, and as the government has pointed out, this will follow the UBF methodologies, which I haven't participated personally in a UBF funding application, but I did participate in previous Industry Canada and ISED projects, and they tend to be a little more detail oriented, a little sticky about the quality of your application, getting it approved. And my understanding is that you would want to take your concept and find an engineering firm that would end up with a drawing design that then you could take to a contractor who would then price it out for you, hopefully under the free quotation basis, but maybe not. And at that point, then that ISP would then be in a position to start filling out the paperwork, for an ISED application. And my gut feeling is that it takes time to do these things. If you started out today and you needed to get community, you have to get support from, say, a regional district. So then you've got to go introduce yourself to the regional district and show them your project and how it would benefit their area, and get them to be prepared to give you that letter of support, without which you might as well not bother proceeding any further. But if you wait for that letter of support, I think 60 days to get a letter of support from a local government is fast. I think you could blow the whole 60 days waiting. That's really only a couple monthly meetings with those guys. So, the 60 days you get burnt up trying to figure out whether or not you should be bothered with your application. And then you need to ask your engineering firm to put you in their schedule. And then of course, you're going to invest perhaps $10,000 in an engineering study. And I'm just throwing a number out there. I've paid more than that for engineering studies of small communities, but one would hope it, you might get down to that level. And so now you have your, and that engineering guy needs a bit of time. He might have to come to your community and do some drone surveys and take some pictures and learn some things, and then get his guys going on that. So if he could turn it around in 30 days, that'd be impressive. And now you've got a letter of support. You've got an engineered design, and now you need to go to someone like Brothers Broadband and say, hi, can you guys give me a price on this so that I can fill up my application? And I imagine Brothers Broadband, you don't want a whole bunch of people showing up at once asking the same question, but that's what this proposed funding cycle seems like it will do. That it will actually, produce a crop of applications that might not have all come in at once, but are now going to come storming in at once, because it does seem like it's a sink or swim moment for the ISP community. So can you comment a little bit about what you think the time cycles would be? I'm guessing a bit here, but the 60 days looks pretty tight to me in terms of turning that around and being able to come up with a fully fleshed out grant application.
Yeah, I agree, Bob, totally. It's our vision to get proof of concept to everybody as soon as possible. Once you have the idea and you have the partnerships and have the community support, we will take a look at your project. Like I said, our team is set up to look quickly on a high level scale and say, okay, you have 3,400 customers or you have 1,200 customers. Obviously, 1,200 customers is going to get done quicker than 3,400. If we're into the real rules with 25 customers to 50 customers, we can probably escalate that time frame into, realistically 45 to 60 days just to get the overall proof of concept, and then have the letter of intents done. So I agree, you're probably looking at closer to 120 to 200 days before we execute. We also have to consider resources, equipment, men, and materials. That also has to come into play. So governments and community municipalities have to consider that. It's not just straight deployment, but if you execute the process flow from start to finish, I think the flow can be generally monitored and executed in a timely manner. Just getting that first step and getting the people to get the process to us so we can quickly get that information back to you.
Right. Thanks for that feedback, Dave. And yeah, this is a challenge. Did you have a comment on that, Dan?
I might just add, some of the support letters are things that, sometimes there's some leeway on those things for turning those in after the fact. If you didn't have them in before, I wouldn't hold up an application, turn in on something like that. Get everything in as quickly as you can and send stuff in as you get it, would just be my suggestion. Or try to get it even in advance. Even if you think that you might be going to apply for something, go and try to get support from the local community, from the local First Nation bands, whatever. Even if you don't have the exact figures of an amount, go try to get the support while you can. Even before, even if you think in the next 6 months you might apply for something, go see if you can get the interest, and don't let it be something that just holds up the whole process and makes it this thing that you feel like everything has to be done in a serial fashion. Maybe you can do some things in parallel with each other.
Agreed.
Yeah, I'd support that statement too.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. And these are all things that we're trying to assemble for the ISP community, so they're informed of what would they be facing if they want to chase this opportunity, what are they looking at, and what time frames do they need to do that. And I guess I had one last question, and then I'll throw it open if anyone has some comments, Tim. But my one question was on GIS systems, because if you start burying things in the ground, you're supposed to know where they are. And GIS systems can be, at least in my experience, were pretty expensive when municipalities bought them and that kind of stuff.
Free GIS, no charges apply.
We're using QGIS for all of that type of stuff with us, and you can get a what they call an RTK GPS that'll give you, sub-inch accuracy, and it gives you basically a way of retaining that data at no cost, and it's all shaped files and stuff like that that's standardized and will work with anybody's ArcGIS or anything else, and there's really no maintenance cost, and that's one of the big killers if you're using something like ArcGIS or one of the big names, is you've got that monthly every month to keep up with, and you might only get into that database system once in 6 months or something if there's a locate or something that's needed, but if you can have that data not costing you every month, it makes a lot of sense to me, especially if it's using formats that are totally standard and are compatible with anybody else's GIS.
I'll speak to that as well. We were given a copy of QGIS many years ago by the Regional District of Central Kootenay, their GIS department, which licenses ArcGIS at $4,000 a month, said, here, have this. It's just as good, and the files will interchange.
The other thing that's handy is a lot of these outlying communities don't have good aerial photos, and you're able to get somebody locally, oftentimes, to get localized drone photos, which you can overlay, which is really helpful with design and building, because you're able to actually have like sub-centimeter accuracy imagery that's relevant to the current way that community looks, not 5 years ago.
In fact, we did just that when we started going through to detailed ground survey. I bought what were a pair of brand new then DJI drones and Pix4D software. Now, I got lucky. I came from the photographic community, and I used to do 3D photogrammetry back when it was on film. So it was second nature. But those tools are available today for very, very low cost and with huge capability and with a little bit of ground control and a pair of drones, one for safety and one for backup, because you'll crash the odd one once in a while. You've got a mapping system that's as good as it gets, and you can do it for maybe out of pocket $1,000 or $1,500 all in.
Yeah.
It's pretty cheap.
Okay, that's very useful information. And any other comments you guys like to throw into our landscape here?
I wanted to ask a question of the audience. How many ISPs or participants in this meeting currently have in their toolbox fiber splicing equipment and optical to main and test gear, power meter and OTDR? That's a huge difference.
In a few years' time, from if you'd asked that question a few years back, you wouldn't have seen so many hands. But fiber is becoming a much more commonplace technology, both in building and in the municipal landscape.
And for people who aren't familiar with fiber, I say get your hands on some single mode fiber, some patch cords and stuff. Get out there and actually try doing something just on your lab back at your office or something. Demystify it. If as long as it's something that's shrouded in mystery, you're never going to actually pick it up and do something with it. But if you have something working on your bench, you can see how that could actually get deployed out into a larger environment. And all of a sudden, it's something that's attainable instead of something that only TELUS or something is capable of.
And it ain't rocket science.
Thank you. I also wanted to do a small shout out here to a couple of the fiber construction firms in British Columbia that are here. We have Light Access and Scott Grant. Is Scott around? He just walked out the door. Anyway, silver hair guy, Scott Grant, a great firm, Light Access. We also have TerraSpan. So Steve Corcoran is here from. Steve, are you in the room? And maybe out there chatting up the customers. But look for those guys around both days, and you're going to want to turn to those or Brothers Broadband once you get to a design stage. And we also have the Sunnyside group here, which is they're from Alberta, but they do design for small ISPs so that they've got something to take to their constructor. And they're here today to and tomorrow to try to help people get around the how would I engineer this so that I can present a proper design. Sorry?
I just want to add one.
Oh, by all means, Dan. So anyway, but that's one of our reasons that we're focusing on the conference this year is to share the skills and spread the skills for small fiber deployments. So if you work together and support those guys, they'll support you. But Dan, what did you want to throw in?
I was just going to say, a lot of these grant applications these days, we're seeing they want to have an experience thing. And so what Bob's mentioning is definitely a way to have that experience check mark added to the application. So the grant funding agencies know that you're actually going to be able to complete something. Another way of doing that is finding an ISP like Kin or ourselves or one of the other ones that have experience with fiber and cooperating with those entities to look over your drawings, whatever, and basically support your application. And that's another way of essentially garnering that support that what you have there is not some pipe dream, it's actually something attainable. And that's something we've definitely been seeing in the last probably 2 or 3 years that grant applications are wanting that sort of backing. But it's not something that needs to be out of reach for anybody. It's still completely something that's attainable.
Well, very, very good point, Dan. We probably used up the time in a bit, but it was my favorite subject, so, and I'm the organizer. So thanks, guys, for bringing all that talent to the stage here, and I'm sure there's lots of folks in the room that can hunt you guys down and get some feedback on your experiences. So
Free consulting.
free consulting. That's just a marketing thing. Don't forget, free is a marketing phrase.
It's free at the conference here today, if you catch him.
Great. All right. Well, thanks very much, guys. And I'd like to thank my audience for showing up today and helping out. I suppose we could take a few questions from the floor if there are any questions that you have for the gentleman on stage.
Quick question for Jonathan. I haven't been on the CanWISP site for a year or two. Do you used to show your membership on the site? That's still the case?
Yeah, that's our membership is not shown on the site. That's correct. If you want to know, we can. If there's a reason, we can get that to you. But yeah, we haven't.
All right. Anyone else? Right. Well, then I should let the Master of Ceremonies take over again and see if he can pick up the pace. Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks, guys.